Welcome to our channel Scary Sagas, where we bring you the most amazing true horror stories. Today, we have bone-chilling stories that will make your blood run cold. These stories are based on real events and have been passed down among the people. Are you ready to hear the ghastly ghosts and demonic spirits that still roam the deserted halls and corridors? I greatly like healing and assisting young children in the early years of my profession as a pediatric nurse. I got increasingly worried and disappointed by the sadder instances and occasional fatalities as time passed. After a particularly heartbreaking instance, I began to doubt if I could continue with my chosen profession, because I was already exhausted. My supervisor advised me to take a break before considering whether or not to resign. I reserved a cottage in the woods and invited my friend Stacy to join me for a delightful 2-week holiday, just the girls. It didn't take long for us to become comfortable, grilling hot dogs over an open fire and sipping homemade margaritas. I awoke at 4:30 a.m. on the third morning and decided to take my coffee out to the back deck. Seeing the sunrise over the mountains lifted my spirits, so I went for a walk in the forest. As I strolled along the trail, picking up pebbles and leaves, I enjoyed the aroma of spruce and pine. As I heard chickling coming from the trees, I froze. I thought I'd strayed upon someone's property since the laughter sounded like multiple youngsters. "Who's there?" I asked, but no one responded. I kept walking, and the woods fell silent for a time. Soon after, I became aware of a presence, which multiplied as the chickling and footsteps increased. I swung around and ran into the trees, attempting to figure out who was following me. The laughing was boisterous and clearly came from youngsters rushing through the woods playing hide and seek. For a brief period, I became engrossed in the game, shouting out to the kids and laughing along with them as I ran. I was astonished to find myself alone when I burst through to a clearing, never seeing them. I walked into the meadow, looking up to feel the warm beams of sunlight on my face. Still I heard the giggles. This time, the laughing was more threatening, and my hackles raised as I realized I was in danger. I retraced my tracks and returned to the trees, trying to locate my route while the laughing followed. Suddenly I came to a complete halt. Many little hands encircled the trunk of a tree just in front of me. I moved a few steps back and noticed that other trees were being gripped by little hands, but I couldn't see the children. The hilarity reached an all-time high when something was hurled right at my head, causing me to dodge and scream in terror. I looked down and noticed it was a pine cone. I rose and began running away from the hands on the trees. No matter how many times I avoided it, the pine cones continued to be flung at me, as did the malicious laughing. When I turned back to look for the youngsters, all I saw were flying pine cones and hands in the woods. I eventually reached the trail and sprinted as fast as I could back to the cabin, not pausing until I saw it. I turned back at the edge of the woodland, out of breath and terrified, and heard several little voices murmuring. Stacy appeared and inquired as to what I was doing and why I was out of breath. I pointed to the jungle, trembling. I was just attacked by kids. They pelted me with pine cones. Stacy burst out laughing and hugged me. I couldn't persuade Stacy of the existence of ghost children. Stacy proceeded to assure me that I dreamt the entire affair after we discussed it numerous times. She reasoned that the stress of my job was what caused the hallucination, but I didn't buy it. I talked her into coming into the forest with me the next day, and she consented and brought a picnic lunch. Irritated me that she wasn't taking me seriously, and it irritated me much more than the ghosts didn't arrive. We walked for many hours and then returned to the cottage in privacy after eating our lunch. I began to worry whether I had hallucinated the attack. So I left the next day, making sure I had my phone. I had the usual sense of being followed as I carefully walked down the trail and soon heard the chickling. "Show yourselves," I shouted. I shot a couple of photographs while holding my phone up to attempt to capture the sounds. As I listened to the audio, there was no sign of laughing, and the visuals merely showed the trees. I was trembling but decided to keep going. It didn't take long for the juvenile muttering to begin all around me. My rage was framed by this point, and I shouted repeatedly as I strode through the woodland. Half anticipating more pine cones, I grabbed a fallen branch and began whacking the trees in a rage. Screamed, "Where have you gone? Display yourselves." As I raged and raced, the laughter and giggles became louder. I came to a halt when I saw a ghostly youngster emerge from behind one of the trees, wearing ragged clothing. I felt sorry for her and she seemed like a neglected child until she started laughing and pointing to the area behind me. When I glanced back, I noticed many hands winding around the branches, with little heads peering out at me from time to time. They were nearly translucent, as I could see the other trees and hands behind them. Other youngsters emerged from behind the trees, laughing and pointing in all directions, which surprised me. They were all under the age of 10, clad in tatters, and seemed lost and forgotten as they taunted me. "What do you want?" I yelled again. As a tiny child with dark eyes approached me, I almost passed out. The frost on his skin chilled my body, and he put out his palm, exclaiming, "We need a new mama." My heart dropped at first because I realized it was impossible unless I died enjoying the children. The notion spurred me into action, and I spun around to leave, but the ghost children had different intentions. Several small footsteps raced after me as I ran through the jungle, and tiny hands grasped my arms and legs. Children's screams and cries replaced their laughing as they followed close behind, matching my speed. As much as I adore children, something told me that this was a sign concerning my ideas of changing careers. They followed me all the way to the forest's edge, and it took me a long time to shake off the sensation of their frigid hands. I persuaded Stacy to go. I didn't want to give the phantom youngsters a chance to grab me and bring me into their haunting realm. I'm not proud of the fact that I was a juvenile delinquent living on the streets of a large city many years ago. When I was 15, I escaped a troubled family with my piggy bank in a bag, full of optimism. A month later, I was scrounging for food and struggling to locate a comfortable bed when nightfall arrived. On the streets, I met Mia, a 17-year-old girl who became like a protective elder sister to me. We had a great time discovering abandoned buildings and frightening each other silly with terrifying stories. It was pouring heavily one night when we came upon a doorway over a tunnel that led to an abandoned subway. Something in my gut told me it wasn't a smart idea, but it had nothing to do with breaking the law. Mia pushed forward, dragging me with her, and we emerged from the downpour into a dark, eerie network of tunnels. It took some time for me to get used to the fundamental sounds, such as dripping water, screeching rodents, and distant metal clangs. I couldn't get used to the frigid air blasts, disembodied voices, and shadows moving across the walls. As a furious voice rumbled loudly, we both came to a halt. Then we heard it shout, "Get out of here." I grabbed Mia's sleeve. We yelled and fled for our lives. The problem was that we were lost in the unending tunnels, with each turn leading us further into the metro. Mia eventually became exhausted, and when we came and found a dry part with old beds, she decided we should remain. I sobbed and begged with her, telling her I didn't want to sleep on filthy beds, but she was enraged. I resigned myself to sitting next to her and remained awake while I watched her lie down with her head on her back. She fell asleep quickly, and my senses were heightened as I strained my eyes and hearing for any form of threat. Shadows appeared quickly, some darting around and others slowly peeping out from corners. As I saw an old man in overalls and a helmet come toward us, frowning aggressively, I leaped. I shook Mia to rouse her up because he appeared translucent but extremely real to me. But she continued to snore. "What do you want?" I said, shaking and crying. He came to a halt 3 feet in front of me and hissed. I froze as he continued marching right through me, chilling me to the bone and shouting. Mia sprang awake and struck me in the hip before falling back asleep. It didn't take long for other spirits to emerge. I shook her and cried, "Wake up, look." But she completely disregarded me. Suddenly I noticed 3 individuals rushing around. 2 of them were women dressed in 1920s attire, hurrying to catch a train. Suddenly I noticed a homeless man. I pleaded with him, "Please, can you assist us?" Thinking he was genuine. He turned and shook his head before walking away. "I'm leaving," I yelled in Mia's ear. This roused her awake, and despite her protests, she came with us. As soon as we started sprinting into the tunnel, a swarm of shadow people and ghosts surged past us. When he flew past, one young man dressed like an old-fashioned cop exclaimed, "You'll never get out." We yelled and wept our way to what looked to be an exit, which was blocked by an enraged nurse. When we came to a standstill, she cackled like a witch. Mia froze suddenly, then slowly turned to face me. Mia's eyes got as wide as golf balls, black and frightening, and she went off on her own down the tunnel while I yelled and begged her to come back. I'm not proud of it, but I was so terrified that I immediately barged out the exit door, leaving Mia behind. I was scared. I had no idea what to do. Yet I managed to find my way to a neighboring police station. I frantically informed the officer at the front desk of what had occurred. He said they'd check into it, but I'm not sure he believed me. They never searched for her, as far as I know. But why would they, you could ask? We're simply a couple of irresponsible homeless kids to them. Mia was never seen again. This is my first time recounting this tale, and while I often ignore ghost stories, I believe that publishing it here could help exorcise the terror that still resides inside me. My granddaughter, on the other hand, urged me to share it. It was the mid-1990s, and I had taken a job as a janitor following a mental breakdown. But that's another tale. The school where I worked was a good one, and the students weren't as horrible as I had imagined. My worst concerns were confirmed as I began emptying the massive basement area in preparation for a new air conditioning system. I recall the first time I went down there. I felt that horrible sensation of dread as I walked down the steps, but I brushed it up to stupid nervousness. I hadn't even gotten to the foot of the steps when my ears were pricked up by a variety of sounds. Some noises can easily explain away as old pipes and so on, but it doesn't account for the groaning. I made my way down the scary tunnels, trying not to pay attention to the noises and feeling the goosebumps on my skin expand like a chilling rash. Suddenly I heard shuffled feet behind me. I turned around, bracing myself for what I assumed would be a joke by a student. I was taken aback since there was nothing but blackness behind me. I nearly turned back, reverting to a fearful child. I knew I had a lot to accomplish, but it didn't seem like I was going to get anything done. As I went along the dingy tunnel, listening to the dripping pipes and attempting to avoid the odd blast of frigid air. I attempted to figure out what the shuffling sounds could have been. I came to a halt as I heard a louder moan. I stood for a time, not daring to shout out for fear of hearing a disembodied response, until the sound of a plank of wood crashing to the floor shocked me into screaming. That was more of a yell, but I was irritated and wanted to reclaim my dignity. I dashed to the room where I assumed the noise was coming from. It was deserted. This fueled my rage. So I stormed out of the room and headed down the tunnel. I didn't have time for any more interruptions. The trouble was that the ghost that was following me had different ideas. An odd, scratchy voice came from nowhere that sounded like an old tune, but I tried to ignore it. I realized the strange chanting had ceased as I neared the first turn. I didn't want to go around the corner for some reason. I knew I had to keep going since other old desks needed to be pulled out. As I noticed a pale light coming from behind the corner, I couldn't help but creep over and take a closer look. I experienced cold perspiration gathering on my body, and when I finally glanced over the corner, the light had vanished. I was peering down a black tunnel at first, but a shadow at the end began to come toward me. I tried to tell myself that it may have been another student, but I was once again incorrect. I couldn't get a decent look without a dependable flashlight, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to, but the dark mass continued to creep towards me like water coursing through a hose in slow motion. It was strange how it ultimately petered out as it drew closer to me. I believed I was going insane. I nearly chuckled as the lights flickered on, revealing an empty tunnel with only a few dark gaps at the end. I boldly marched to the storehouse and unlocked the massive sliding door. Before I entered the room, I looked about to make sure it was safe for me to do so. At first, everything appeared to be in order. I was upset at myself for being such a scaredy cat as an older guy. So I began whistling to calm my anxiety. Then I noticed a second round of hasty shuffling coming up behind me. As I caught sight of a gray shadow flying towards me, I swung around and gasped. I hadn't shouted, but when I glanced up, there was no one there. I'd had enough of it. I decided I needed to get out and make another plan, such as taking someone with me the following time. I swear I heard whistling coming from behind me as I sprinted back out to the entrance, but I didn't stop until I got there. I subsequently lied to the principal about not finishing my assignment, claiming that the power had gone out. It was vexing when I returned the next day, armed with a torch and escorted by one of the professors. Even though it was still eerie, none of the incidents of the prior date transpired. I made it a point to never return there alone, although I am frequently worried about who or what was following me. When I think about it, I still shudder. When I told people this tale, no one ever believed me, but that didn't stop me from telling it. I don't intend to brag, but people have always thought of me as a large, strong man who never shied away from a task. I don't mind telling you in private that I'm afraid of ghost stories, particularly when they are true like mine. As they say, I was a spring bird back then, traveling the world for a fantastic company in an effort to increase sales when this incident occurred. Germany was and continues to be my favorite travel destination. I adore the historic cities and country estates, as well as the liquid bread of thick beer with the viscosity of honey and their fantastic cuisine. A former doctor's house served as one of the properties where I lodged. I was informed by the proprietors at the time that this doctor was a Nazi who allegedly carried out terrible experiments. He was also rumored to have a surgical addiction. My bones shook when I saw a picture of him because he had a terrible smile. due to a bizarre event when he slipped and fell on a wire, which slit his mouth and went through to his cheeks and all the way to his jawline. The smile was permanent. The current owners reassured me that I was secure and that they had even had a local priest conduct a cleaning when they had moved in, despite the fact that I was terrified. Nonetheless, I could still picture his eerie smile in my head. I made an effort to think ahead to the next day's trade expo, which would have tons of delicious European cuisine and booze, while I got ready for bed. I made an effort to ignore my prickly hair and the sporadic Frigidaire bursts on my face. I convinced myself that the building was old and had drafts and outdated plumbing. I reviewed my notes in bed before nodding off, but I don't recall doing so. The room was pitch black when I awoke a few hours later. The majority of the space was still visible to me since the moonlight was streaming in through the stained glass windows. I then noticed my breath leaving as white clouds. There was a strong cold. We were in the midst of a wonderful summer, so it confused me. The strong scent of formaldehyde made my blood start to freeze. I thought I heard many ominous German murmurs. A horrible visage suddenly materialized and was hanging over me as I made the decision to sit up and turn on the lamp. That was the evil Nazi physician. Keep in mind that I didn't drink before bed, which was something I generally enjoyed doing. I don't mind telling you that I yelled like a young girl since the face had a peculiar blue color. He scowled at me with his horrifyingly broad smile, staring into my soul with his crazy eyes. Air slipping beneath the covers, I dropped out of bed. The face was gone when I got up, but the formaldehyde smell, the very cold temperature, and the continual murmuring in German are all still there. I could hardly understand the language, but 3 words "Hello klein Schweinchen," which means "Hello tiny pig," kept coming to me. I jumped over to the nightstand and flipped the lamp switch. Much to my relief, the odor and cold vanished when the room brightened up. I didn't wait to move because I knew the room across the corridor was unoccupied, and I didn't even bother to get the owner's permission. I left the light on just in case because it took me a long time to fall asleep. A few hours later, when I finally woke up, I saw that the light was once more out. I reached out to switch it back on even though I wasn't sure if the lamps had a time mechanism. I retracted my fingers in panic as I sensed a pocket of extremely cold air at that moment. Formaldehyde's recognizable fragrance seeped into my nose. I sprang up and trembled. The chamber was far darker than the other one, and it appeared as though the moon was unable to illuminate it. I was astounded by what I saw when I turned to face the window. In front of the glass, I noticed a shadow moving back and forth as though it were a guy floating. I yelled and ran to the door as soon as I overheard the mumbling once more. As I felt a powerful rush of cold air on my neck, I shouted once again. The shadow guy was gone when I turned back, but the scent was still there and the murmuring had grown frenzied. The door then opened. When I sank back, I noticed the owner looking at me with wide eyes. "The doctor is here," I cried, pointing to the window. He chuckled and inquired as to my purpose in the space. He chuckled again when I explained what had happened and said that perhaps they shouldn't have given me the doctor's photos since I must have a vivid imagination. I didn't want to risk seeing that face again, so I left the home. He has subsequently shown up in my nightmares, which is the worst luck. I get goosebumps when I recall the look on the hotel owner's face and the doctor's image I saw. There is an unusual resemblance, but it is diminished by the fact that the building's owner didn't appear to have undergone any cosmetic procedures. Often the ingredients in ghost stories are far more complicated than the typical spooks or creatures that go bump in the night. I should be aware. The most unsettling and frightening thing that has ever happened to me has remained to be this incident. I was traveling to my dad's house for the weekend during the start of the 1998 fall season. After my parents split, I traveled whenever I could check on him. For me, it was also quite soothing. I had a really demanding job, so the journey was a good way to unwind and stay in contact before a tranquil weekend in the country. This vacation had a very different outcome and a big impact on me. I should point you out that my mother passed away in a home fire 2 years after my parents' divorce as a result of her smoking in bed. Given that my family had been divided as a result of the unfavorable parts of the divorce, it had been a challenging period. It turned out that my mother's allegation that my father had cheated on her wasn't founded. Well, as I got to the halfway point on the rural road, there was a slight fog, with the trees on each side. It was such a lovely scene that I soon entered a state of meditation. I wasn't aware that an hour had passed until I suddenly became aware of my surroundings and questioned why I still wasn't at Dad's. Another hour passed, and I immediately began to fear. Since I didn't have a GPS at the time, I began to watch for landmarks. As I kept seeing the same old red barn and the same mailboxes over and over again, I got a shiver. My thoughts were racing to make sense of what was happening. The sensation of a presence then caught my attention, making my skin crawl. I caught a glimpse of a person in the rear seat out of the corner of my eye. The apparition in the rearview mirror vanished each time I turned to face it. I pulled over because I thought I was going crazy and attempted to gather my composure. I exited the car and started to scan the area. Everything appeared to be okay. I saw the figure gazing directly at me as I returned to the car and checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror. The fact that my mom was the figure was the most startling aspect. She grinned and then vanished once more as the blood drained from my face. I turned around in my chair, but nobody was there. I suddenly felt the desire to go to my dad's place, so I started the car and drove away. I drove gently, and fortunately there were no other vehicles on the route. Even though the fog was becoming worse, I tried my best to pay attention to everything on and surrounding the road. I was afraid that I might lose them until I spotted the well-known mailboxes once more. Unsure of what to do, I heard a voice instructing me to turn back and go home. I initially assumed it was my own thoughts. I questioned if doing so would aid in reversing or halting whatever was keeping me from reaching Dad's house. I came to a stop, swung about, and went in the other direction. The return to normalcy was quick to happen. I quickly understood that I was indeed headed home after 30 minutes. In my dazed state, the concept of being caught in a loop had not occurred to me. I made the decision to try my luck. So I turned the car around once more and sped for my father. What do you expect? The same repetitive lunacy, with the never-ending fog, started up within a half hour. When I started to lose my fury, my mother suddenly appeared in the back seat, and I started to feel uneasy. I shouted into the rearview mirror, wondering if I was having a hallucination. Stop it. Well, I can go see my father. As much as I loved you, Mom, I love him just as much. I was startled to see the smirk slowly go from her pale face. Suddenly, she was grinning with love and sincerity. The road cleared when she disappeared, allowing me to get to my dad's house. Dad rushed out and held me in his arms as I was sobbing and felt like I had just escaped from a Twilight Zone episode as I staggered to his door. I informed him what had happened when we got inside, and he made an attempt to brush it off by saying that the stress of my job was to blame. I questioned if he was correct, but I was unable to escape the feeling that it was all true. Nothing unusual happened during the course of the weekend, not even on my drive back home. As I arrived, I pulled a picture of my mother out of a drawer. Next to my favorite picture of my father, I hung it up on my desk. Until that day, it hurt to look at her picture. Since then, I've gained a fresh appreciation for her suffering. They seem to like that these stories will leave you with more questions than answers. They are a reminder that sometimes the truth is much darker and more mysterious than we ever imagined. Join us next time on Scary Sagas for other spine-chilling true stories.